You know, when you think about it, your smartphone feels like this single solid piece of magic, right? But what's actually going on inside is, well, it's not just circuits and code. It's pure, raw chemistry.
I love this quote because it's so true. Every single second you're using your phone, there's this tiny controlled chemical reaction firing off. It's like a constant, invisible baking soda volcano that makes our entire digital world possible. So how in the world does that little volcano work?
We're going to break this whole thing down. First, we'll look at how it actually creates power in the first place. Then we'll get into what's happening when you plug it into charge. And finally, we'll tackle that question we all have. Why, after a year or two, your phone just can't seem to hold a charge anymore?
All right, so let's start at the beginning. How does a lithium-ion battery actually make the electricity that runs your phone? It all boils down to a really simple, fundamental idea.
See, at its heart, electricity is just a stream of these tiny, negatively charged particles called electrons, all moving in the same direction. So the battery's entire job is to create that stream, and to pull that off, it needs a few key ingredients.
First up, you've got the anode. That's the negative side of our battery, and it's made of graphite. Yep, a lot like the stuff in your pencil. It acts as this perfect little storage garage, holding on to lithium atoms. Now here's the crucial part. Lithium is just dying to give away one of its electrons.
And on the other side of the battery, we have the cathode, the positive terminal. This is made with cobalt oxide, and its whole chemical personality is the exact opposite of lithium's. Cobalt desperately wants to grab an extra electron. So you can kind of see where this is going, right? We've got one material that wants to give an electron and another that wants to take one.
But there's a catch. We can't just let them mix freely. That would be chaos. That's where the electrolyte comes in. It's this special liquid that acts like a bouncer at a club. It lets the lithium ions, that's the lithium atoms after they've lost their electron, pass right through. But, and this is key, it blocks the electrons themselves. This forces the electrons to take the long way around through the circuits of your phone.
So here's the whole dance in action. When you turn on your phone, the lithium atoms over in the graphite anode finally get to do what they want. They release their electrons. Those electrons shoot out of the battery and race through your phone's circuits, powering the screen, the processor, everything. Meanwhile, the lithium ions that are left behind cruise through the electrolyte to the other side to meet up with the cobalt. That movement keeps everything balanced and allows the flow of electrons to continue until pretty much all the lithium has moved over. And at that point, your battery is dead.
Okay, so your phone's out of juice, now what? Well, this is where we get to the recharge. This is where we literally force that little chemical volcano to run completely backward.
When you plug your phone in, your charger acts like a super powerful pump. It applies an electrical force that's way stronger than the battery's natural chemical pull. It basically rips those electrons away from the cobalt and shoves them all the way back over to the graphite anode.
And you can see here, it's a perfect reversal. When you're using your phone, electrons and ions flow from the anode to the cathode. When you're charging, your charger pushes them right back from the cathode to the anode. The lithium ions get dragged back through the electrolyte and slotted right back into their graphite garage, all ready to start the whole process over again. So the anode, cathode, and electrolyte are definitely the stars of the show. But there are a few other really critical parts working behind the scenes to make sure your battery is not only efficient, but also safe. First, and this one is absolutely essential, is the separator. It's just a thin sheet, but it keeps the anode and cathode from ever touching. Because if they did, you'd get a massive short circuit, the reaction would go nuts, and the battery could literally catch fire. So yeah, it's a pretty important little piece of plastic. Then you have collectors, thin sheets of copper and aluminum that help gather up all those electrons and get them flowing. And finally, there's some really smart circuitry that acts like a brain, managing the whole show to prevent overcharging and keep everything stable. And that brings us to the final and, let's be honest, most frustrating part of the whole story. If this process is supposed to be perfectly reversible, why does your battery life get worse and worse over time? Why do they all eventually just die? Well, it all comes down to these pesky, unavoidable side reactions. Over hundreds of charge cycles, some of the lithium starts reacting with the electrolyte, and it forms this layer of, well, gunk that basically traps the lithium and takes it out of the game for good. Another problem happens if you let your battery drain completely. The materials can actually break down and form these super stable compounds that get stuck and can't be part of the reaction anymore. Each time one of these things happens, a tiny bit of your battery's total capacity is just gone forever.
So here's a little pro tip for you. You can actually slow this process down. To avoid creating those stuck compounds we just talked about, it's actually much better to start charging your phone when it hits, say, 30 or 40%, instead of letting it run all the way down to 0. A little bit of prevention really can go a long way.
Whew, okay. We've covered a lot, from atoms and ions to chargers and all that chemical gunk. But what's the big takeaway here? What's the core idea? Well, it turns out that pretty much every battery, no matter what it's made of, relies on the same 3 basic things.
At its absolute core, to make a battery, you need 3 things. 1, something that is desperate to give away electrons, like our lithium. 2, something that's just as desperate to gain electrons, like our cobalt. And 3, you need a path that lets ions move across to balance the charge and keep the whole reaction going. That's it. Everything else is just fine-tuning those 3 principles.
And that kind of leaves us with this one last big question. We understand the chemistry that makes these things work, and we also understand the side reactions that make them fail. So the next great challenge is this. Can we design a new chemistry that gets rid of those unwanted reactions? What would it take to build a battery that never degrades? A tiny volcano that could power our devices forever?